Hello everyone, Shirley here. The classic grind continues at level 41, and today I wanted to make a short video to go over some add-ons, some basic macros, and a few tips at the end of this for helping you guys level up your warrior or just do dungeons, you know, anything at all, questing, make things a little bit easier on you. And I've done quite a bit of Scarlet Monastery and seen a few errors that people have been making already along the way, so I wanted to make this video to talk about some of that stuff. But anyway, first things first, let's get going on this. Add-ons. What am I running right now? Not a lot. I just wanted to go over these quickly and give you a little heads up as to why I might be using them. Atlas Loot, pretty basic. It just allows you to see all your dungeon journal stuff like on live, to see where drops come from if you want to target a specific piece of gear from dungeons. Quite nice. Classic aura durations. Now this add-on I would definitely not get rid of. Now before I need this. Before I talk about it though, I do have to point out threat plates here. Threat plates is just a basic add-on that shows your nameplates, so it looks like this on enemies, these brutes. And the aura duration thing now allows me to track debuffs on my targets, like on live, and Classic WoW doesn't show you that. So before, on your targets, nameplate down here, as well as the threat plate, you would just see Ren, for example, if I were to Ren this guy. But with the duration, it will now give you the clock countdown thing on their target, as well as a number up on the threat plate, which is very useful for tracking bleeds and stuff like Moral Strix debuff, etc. So, yeah. Kill this guy real quick here. Very useful add-on. Moving on, we have Classic Cast Bars. Pretty basic add-on. Self-explanatory. It shows cast bars on people. Very nice for PvP, especially out in the open world to help save yourself from those pesky mages. Details, yeah, you know what details is. It's your damage plugin. Oh, we have classic spell activations here too. Now this basically lights up procs and things on your hotbar, kind of like on live. So I could have pointed it out on that ogre there, but when they get into execute range, it'll give you the glowing yellow border on your execute. Or if they dodge, your overpower will light up like on live, or how it used to be on live. And that just allows you to see it quickly at a glance without just, watching the target or blah, blah, blah. It's just something else to stand out. It looks pretty. I have Real Mob Health version 2. This basically shows you the target's health pools, because on Classic, they do not by default show that. And the difference being is that you have to tag mobs first. The reason why this guy's showing up is because I've killed a lot of these ogres, and it has an internal memory on the add-on that will store and track and record all their health pools if you fought them before. But if you're fighting another player, for example, you have to get into melee combat and hit them with something, and then it'll make an estimate of their health pool based on how much damage you did to them. And it fluctuates a little bit at the top end, but it very quickly gives you a pretty accurate representation on how much health they actually have. So really like that one. It, definitely allows you to judge whether or not you should be playing differently, more defensively or aggressively, based on how much health whatever you're hitting has. So definitely like that. Threat plates, went over that. Vendor price, this just shows all your vendor price add-ons of things in your bags if you mouse over them. Weapon swing timer, I'm sure you've heard about this one and seen it. This is the add-on down here that's kind of grayed out in black and red. It'll light up in combat that tracks your weapon swings. Very, very useful for warriors. Not so much for other classes, but for warriors, very nice. DBM, not using it really at this moment, but I have it installed. I guess it does work in some of the dungeons, yeah. And it's classic dungeons. They're not really that hard. And last but not least, I have Questy installed just to track things on your map for quest objectives like these little bags. Very useful. Probably seen it before. Now getting on to the nitty-gritty. What is the macros that I'm using? I'm sure this is going to be updated, and I'm going to be adding more, maybe removing a few of these in the future. We'll see. None of these are very advanced or anything. Just quality of life things that I have found to be very useful for my warrior right now. And first and foremost, before I go over the macros, you should definitely have all your stances keybound to something individually by themselves, on whatever keys you guys prefer. Key bindings is totally subjective, so I'll leave that up to you. But you definitely want them all bound separately because some of these macros make sense in the context that I'm going to be stance dancing manually a lot of times anyway. These macros just smooth out the process of things. So going over these from start to finish, I suppose, I have an overpower macro right here, which is very simple. It just casts battle stance and then overpower, and you'll have to change the ranks on that as well. Now, I don't have that on my battle bar, but I have that on my berserker bar, you know, so I can quickly activate it if I see that my target dodges or whatever, and that will instantly, on a key press, throw me to battle stance and overpower. And the nice thing about classic macros with stancing is that the stances are off GCD, so you can macro these things together like this, and all it takes is one button press. You don't need to hit it twice like you do other things or in Modern WoW. For example, some things you have to hit twice if it's being a bit finicky is this sword and board macro. So down here, it just equips my my sword and shield and puts me in defensive stance if I need on the fly to quickly take threats or taunt something or tank, you know, in a pinch. And that one usually requires 2 key presses. For whatever reason, it will put on the shield and put you in D-stance, but the second press will actually equip the sword. I want to say that worked on 1 press before, but I can't figure out exactly what I've done wrong to make it not. But it's really fast, like you can just spam the key a couple of times to get it off anyway. And that flows into the other macro, which is just equips your 2-hander, and that's totally separate from whatever stance I'm in, because sometimes it's nice to be able to tank, quote-unquote, in a dungeon with your 2-hander, because you can do that as a warrior in Classic, which is quite nice. Moving on back to the top end of these macros, I have an intercept macro, which simply has intercept and hamstring tied together. It doesn't cast a stance or anything, because you have to be in berserker stance to cast intercept in the first place, just like charge requires battle stance. So those are something that I'm going to be manually switching between, you know, between the 2 stances just to cast. I just want to have my hamstring built into both of these macros. So going over that one, it's just charge and hamstring, just like on live, built into the same button, because it's off GCD, so you can put hamstring in it and, you know, save yourself a key binding. And hamstring lasts quite a while on Classic, so it's, you know, you can easily track it with threat plates or just on the target themselves. You don't really need it for the bar. Going on to the next one, we have a taunt macro. Very simple, just puts you in a defensive stance on 1 press and taunts your enemy, so you don't have to fumble for the time it takes to actually, you know, go into D-stance. If something, you know, if your tank dies and you need threat instantly, you can do that. The next one, I have a whirlwind macro. Now this one is very obvious and straightforward. Cast berserker stance, cast whirlwind. However, a lot of times in a dungeon environment when you might be using this, I'll be dancing between Zerker and battle stance. Say I need to pop sweeping strikes again, and I can track Whirlwind's cooldown on my top bar here and still off 1 press cast Whirlwind once it comes up and I have enough rage. Now you're probably thinking, aren't you going to lose rage on that? Yes and no. So sometimes if you're taking damage, especially if you're just tanking it yourself, then you're overflowing with rage anyway, and it doesn't really matter. You can lose 2 or 3 rage, you know, taking damage and instantly hitting that and then instantly swapping back to whatever stance you need to be in. However, I do like it there just to quickly track for those situations. A lot of times, though, if you see your auto attack going over and you're at like 20 rage and you know that when you hit you're going to overcap rage, and switching stances is going to drop you down to 25 rage because of tactical mastery, then in that case, before my auto swing goes through, even if I'm tanking and I can plan for it and I'm not in immediate danger, then you can just swap into Zerker stance, you know, before your auto goes off. That way you're not wasting rage on that whirlwind. Lot of explanation there for something that's not that complicated. Anyway, moving on, we have sweeping strikes. This is the same thing. It just puts me into battle stance and casts sweeping strikes, so you can track that. Now, you can't actually do this. You know, you only retain 25 rage, so unless you're taking a ton of damage and you instantly can snap 5 more rage out of it, then you're going to have to double press this one. It's mostly just for me to track my own cooldown and pop it on the same key binding from the separate stance. I have a retaliation macro, which simply casts battle stance and retaliation because it requires battle stance for some reason, just like the shield wall macro requires defensive stance. Now, this one is just defensive stance and shield wall. I could put the sword and board macro into that in the first place, but frankly, if I'm going to be needing shield wall, I've already got the sword and board equipped, so this is just kind of an easy key press in case I'm in battle stance, charging or popping whatever. I have a Zerker Rage macro, and this one just puts you into Zerker stance and cast Zerker Rage on a single key press, like so. Now, if you do get feared in Classic, you can't hit this and break a fear. This is a preemptive thing, so when you're fighting Warlocks, you can always see them just casting fear, and in which case you can, at the end of their cast, just press this, you know, if you're trying to maintain uptime and not worry about it. Versus a warrior or a priest or whatever, then you gotta be a little bit more risky and play in Berserker stance to bait out their fear while you're in that stance to make full use of it. Next, I have a Pummel macro, and this one just puts you in Berserker stance and cast Pummel because it requires you to be in that stance and costs 10 rage, so Pummel's, it's a little rough on Classic, but it's nice because if you have the required rage for it, this will still kick your enemy with one button press. And then I have a Disarm macro for defensive stance, just very easy, nice for PvP. I have a Mortal Strike macro. This one is very big. It doesn't sound big, but I would highly recommend you guys do this. Put this in a few attacks. You could put it in everything if you wanted. I've just got it in a few things, which is /start attack. That way you can take off your basic button. I just have it bound in my Mortal Strike because I've always liked having Mortal Strike on that key. And I have the same thing with Rend, which is start attack. That way, if I get caught in a defensive stance or something, and sometimes you want to just throw up some bleeds and you're not actually attacking something because your target next to it dies or whatever, then while you're pressing this, you can just go ahead and hit start attack with that macro. Now, I also have it bound into battle stance, so this is for when you're in Berserker stance, you can quickly maintain Rend off of, you know, the same key bind without having to go through 2 key bindings to get your Rend back up. And then I can, you know, quickly switch back to whatever. I have a Thunderclap macro, and this one's mostly for defensive stance tanking. It'll quickly throw you into battle stance and Thunderclap to get snap aggro on multiple targets. And yeah, that's about it. These are just my 2 weapon swap macros I would highly recommend you get as well to go along with separate key bindings for all your stances. And yeah, it definitely takes a little bit of practice to get very fluid at bouncing between all the stances and doing everything you need to do, especially in PvP in the heat of the moment. But it's very satisfying to pull it off if you can. And now for the last part of the video, I wanted to go over a few things regarding sweeping strikes, really, or dungeon openers. Wow, there are a lot of Alliance players here right now. That's a little uncalled for. I was hoping to tag a couple of mobs at the same time, so I could go over what I've been doing very quickly in a dungeon environment. And we're wasting time here, so I guess I can just do it on this guy, even though he's not 2 separate targets like I was hoping for. Well, this won't even work because I won't get the rage generation that I'm wanting off of only 1 target. I'll leave the Alliance alone for now. A bit outnumbered here. Ah, here we go. Finally, got some two Yetis here. So what I would recommend, and this guy's gonna steal the tag. Awesome. Well, whatever. We're gonna charge this guy anyway. And what I would normally do is pop Zerker Rage, or not Zerker Rage, Blood Rage to get the sweeping strikes, and then I would pop Zerker Rage if there were 2 targets here, hypothetically. And then you're gonna Whirlwind off of both of these targets with sweeping strikes up, and that's gonna give you a ton of rage back from popping Berserker Rage immediately when you do that and swap stances, because it requires it, and also you're going to be whirlwinding right after. And why do you do that is because on Classic, Berserker Rage makes you generate extra rage when taking damage, and rage generation is also based off of how much damage you take. So it might seem backwards, but you actually want to be taking like 10% extra damage for that brief window to get really good threat on things really fast if you're tanking. Mind you, if you're doing this as DPS, you probably want to wait a second because you're going to pull aggro if you're getting hits with Zerk up and Whirlwind with sweeping strikes, because If you didn't know, when you have sweeping strikes up, it will hit your adjacent target, of course, with your auto attacks, but Whirlwind will consume 2 stacks of sweeping strikes. So it gives you 5 charges, and if you Whirlwind, it'll consume 2 stacks and use up both of them. It won't just delete it, it'll actually hit the target twice on both targets. You're getting 4 hits out of it. Really fast. I wouldn't say for free, but, you know, you're not spending any extra rage for it, so it's kind of that way. And it's a nice bit of chunk burst AoE. And the same thing applies to Cleave. So if you have Sweeping Strikes up and you hit Heroic Strike, for example, it will just, you know, buff that auto attack and hit both. It will actually buff the auto attack on the adjacent target as well, which is nice to know, but Cleave itself will buff it, and it will consume 2 charges because it procs Sweeping Strikes off the other target, so it, like, ping-pongs back and forth. So it'll consume 2 stacks just like Whirlwind does, and buff both of them slightly from Cleave's own damage. But yeah, that's something quick about Sweeping Strikes I wanted to go over. And Berserker Rage, as well as Rend doesn't, unlike on Live, you can't multi-Rend with Sweeping Strikes, if you guys hadn't figured it out yet. So it'll proc an auto attack on your adjacent target, but Rend itself only hits for, you know, like 18 damage or whatever it may be, the really low number to apply the bleed itself. So generally speaking, I wouldn't be Rending when I have Sweeping Strikes up. I'd much rather just be Mortal Striking or Whirlwinding or Cleaving or whatever. And if you do Mortal Strike with Sweeping Strikes up, it'll consume a charge, not eat your auto attack, and it will actually cleave the Mortal Strike itself, so you get the extra 85 damage on top of it on the adjacent target, which is really nice. But for whatever reason, Execute doesn't do that. If you cleave and execute, it'll do like a full damage execute on your primary target, but the adjacent target, it will still hit, but it'll only do weapon damage. It won't do like the extra execute damage. So keep that in mind. If something, or a couple of things are really low, it might actually be better to just Mortal Strike them both if you want to get like a cheeky double kill on something. But yeah, anyway, this has gone on for quite long enough. Thank you very much for watching. If you have any questions, feel free to leave them down below, and I will see you next time. Peace.